Total testosterone, 1066.4 nanograms per deciliter. Vigorous Steve here. I've been back on cycle now for 5 weeks, did my blood work last Sunday. So here we are. We're going to review it and make a direct comparison to the blood work I took about 6-7 weeks ago when I was still PED free. I want to compare the complete blood count, the liver function, the kidney function, the lipid levels, and of course all the hormonal changes which have occurred after going back on cycle and administering a little bit of exogenous testosterone and some goodies on top. But before we get into it, please like the video, leave a comment for the algorithm, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Let me give you guys a brief rundown of what I've been using for the last 5 weeks. If you want a little bit more detailed explanation, you can watch this video here, which I took, 5 weeks ago when I started with this protocol. I've been using 156 milligrams testosterone enanthate plus 125 milligrams primobolan per week. The reason why these dosages are a little bit funky is because I'm using Bayer testoviron and Bayer rimobolan, which these ampules are generally a little bit overfilled to account for a little bit of waste when drawing from the ampules. But I've become quite proficient in drawing product from ampules because I've been using pharmaceutical grade exclusively, at least injectable steroids in pharmaceutical grade for the last 5-6 years now. So you usually get about 1.2, 1.25, 1.3 milliliters even out of an ampule of testoviron or rimobolan. So I have to keep it honest with you guys. I've been using a little bit more than I was intended, which I explained in the previous video. My initial idea was to run 125 milligrams test and 100 milligrams primo. But again, you get a little bit more product when drawing from these ampules. So it's been 156 milligrams of testosterone enanthate and 125 milligrams of primobolan, going by the average of how much liquid I'm able to draw from these ampules. So that's 78 milligrams or 0.31 milliliters on Monday and Friday, being the testosterone enanthate, and 62.5 milligrams or 0.63 milliliters rounded up on Monday and Friday of the primobolan. So that's a 2 or a biweekly injection frequency administration protocol. I've been using 200 micrograms Kisspeptin 10 subcutaneously before bed on a daily basis in an attempt to sustain my hypothalamic pituitary testes and adrenal axes. I've been using 5 to 10 milligrams of GHK copper intramuscularly post-workout, and I would administer that 50-50 bilaterally. So for example, on a shoulder day, I would use 5 milligrams GHK copper, injected 2.5 milligrams in the left and in the right front deltoids. And on a leg day, I would administer 5 milligrams GHK copper on the left and right teardrop. Now, what I've noticed so far, I didn't notice a reduction in gray hair or a reduction in wrinkles. Those are still present, as you can see. Might have to consider Botox if it was really bothering me, but it doesn't really bother me. At least I don't have to look at my own wrinkles all the time. That's you guys. So if you guys are bothered with the wrinkles, let me know. I might consider some Botox. But then my eyebrow game is going to be severely diminished. So far, what I've noticed is that I get an increased recovery at the site of administration. So I've been administering my front delts, my teardrops, my chest. And because it recovers faster, or at least in my opinion, I also feel a better mind-muscle connection. Now, it's a little bit presumptuous to say how many benefits I'm getting. Because again, I'm growing back into my muscle memory. So I'll really have to see when I kind of max out if this GHK copper can cause some sort of localized site enhancement, whether that's through collagen synthesis and improving recovery capability in between workouts, or increase mind-muscle connection, allowing me to train at a higher capacity. Because again, I've always been a horrible presser, so I never really had a good contraction in my chest, my front delts, my triceps. I have always been more of a pulling kind of guy, right? The deadlifts, the rows, the stiff-legged deadlifts, all those exercises do go very, very well for me. And then I can really connect with those body parts. That's why most of the muscle is unfortunately behind me and not in front of me. So I'm actively trying to change that by administering the GHK copper into the teardrops, the chest, the front delt. And once I feel that that has a beneficial effect with long-term use, I might switch to triceps as well, because that's the clearest lagging body part that I have. Even though from the front you would not be able to tell that much, but I've always had an issue contracting with this part. So at one point I will start to administer GHK copper in here, and let's see if I can round out this tricep a little bit, get a better mind-muscle connection, and hopefully recover from 2 sessions of triceps every week, because now I hit it on chest day, I hit it on tricep day, and then I combine that with shoulders afterwards, because again, I'm trying to grow my triceps as much as possible, and my shoulders usually kind of fill out pretty fast by themselves with a little bit of stimulation on chest day and a dedicated shoulder day by themselves. So that's an update regarding the GHK copper so far. Once I really figure out how I can use this properly, I'll make a separate video about this and give you guys the insight on how to incorporate the GHK copper for yourself if you're interested in the benefits that come along with GHK copper, and you can cruise through the post-injection pain. I've also been using 250 micrograms of HGH Frag 176 to 195, which is a truncated part of growth hormone that is set to induce lipolysis. So I've been injecting 250 micrograms before fasted cardio every day, because I do fasted cardio every day, and 250 micrograms before the workouts 5 times a week. I've noticed a decent amount of fat loss. That's the only fat burner that I've been using so far. And again, I do my fasted cardio on a daily basis, and then I walk in between sets to increase my caloric expenditure and allow my heart rate not to really come down all the way. And I've been doing that just to be a lot more time efficient, because I really don't have the time to do another 30 minutes of post-workout cardio, because usually post-workout is the time that I start editing videos and proof watching and making sure you guys get the timestamps. At one point, I'll probably bring a pedometer with me to the gym and count how many steps I'm doing in between sets, right? To see if I get like 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 steps while walking around in a gym that is pretty empty. I'm the only guy there training right now. So I just want to see how much extra steps I'm getting that way, and then see if that's something sustainable in case the gyms are open again, and then I have to navigate walking in between other gym members. And as my ancillaries, I've been using 5 milligrams nebivolol to prevent negative heart remodeling now that I'm back on cycle. Again, the MRIs and the ultrasounds showed that I had no left ventricular hypertrophy or athlete's heart or thickening of the walls, and I'm trying to keep it that way, so 5 milligrams nebivolol will be a staple in my protocol. And I also like to calm the sympathetic nervous system down post-workout, because again, working out for me is pretty fight or flight, even though I don't really set dedicated targets for myself regarding particular weights or rep ranges, and try to follow a progressive overload, do or die. Training is still a little bit intense for me, so using 5 milligrams nebivolol to calm me down post-workout. 10 milligrams ezetimibe to help with my lipid levels and try to keep my HDL high, LDL low, total cholesterol low, and keep the lipoprotein A levels a little bit lower. Again, I took that out before I did the previous blood work to see where my lipoprotein A levels would come back at with endogenous testosterone production and without ezetimibe. And now I have the data to show that ezetimibe plus exogenous testosterone is able to lower lipoprotein A levels, which is it was one of the markers that actually improves by going back on exogenous testosterone. And I've been using 20 milligrams of telmisartan, again, to help with to help prevent negative heart remodeling, help with blood pressure, increase nutrient delivery, and modulate the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Because again, steroids make you hold water, and that's what I'm trying to prevent. I'm trying to prevent the moon phase going forward. That's why I went with HGH Frag instead of exogenous recombinant human growth hormone, because that potentiates a decent amount of water retention, and I'm trying to remain a little bit more aesthetic than previously. So that has been my protocol for the last 5 weeks. Before we get into the blood work, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping regarding the previous video that I made when I was 2 weeks into this cycle. So I mentioned there that I was getting some acne back that I was able to resolve by being a little bit more diligent with my food. So I removed a couple spices. I removed all the dairy products besides yogurt. So no more cheese, unfortunately, on my cheat day. and no more chocolate. So I had a couple pimples which are now slowly going away. So hopefully with this, right, excluding particular food sources, I can modulate my acne and keep that at bay. And I think in the beginning I got some acne partially because of the food choices and partially because of the hormonal fluctuations that occurred by going back on cycle. And now that has kind of stabilized. But I'm still doing bi-weekly administrations. I will make some changes going forward simply to modulate my estradiol levels. And then hopefully my acne will remain at bay as well. Again, I wanted to emphasize that I don't want to be a bloat monster anymore. So I think so far I've been successful with that by staying on the same caloric intake, not going back on insulin or growth hormone or all that kind of stuff. Again, I'm trying to prevent the grind or die lifestyle. It's very hard, to be honest. Right? When I go to the gym, I go 100%, and I'm kind of privileged right now to be able to train in a gym, unlike so many other people in Thailand. So I'm doing my best to not fall victim to progressive overload. But I've been training like that for almost 20 years. So I do catch myself sometimes pushing the envelope a little bit too much. And I noticed that the next day where I have to tell myself, Steve, you got to slow down a little bit because your recovery capability is not there. The calories are not there. And the hormonal increase has been more than endogenous production, but it's not anywhere close to a real cycle where you can actually do all these hardcore sets to failure and beyond failure as much as possible without a spotter. And then do a back-off set after that and do that multiple times during the workout. So I'm trying to slow myself down a little bit. I've already restored as much muscle mass as I wanted to. I mean, I was 100 kilos this Monday. 100 kilos this Monday. That was after a refeed. So again, it's a little bit of a glycogen load and a little bit of water retention, but I'm already big enough. So I'm trying to mitigate a little bit of this grind or die lifestyle, but it's still a passion. So I'm trying to do my best managing the training intensity and everything else that I need to do during the day. Because I did notice that I was getting a little bit sleepy. So, that's why this week is going to be a deload. And I wanted to get that blood work in before I scheduled my deload. Armpit farts still there, but getting less. Again, losing a little bit of body fat. And, so every time I pick up a weight now, there's, no queefs anymore, but there's still a little bit of that feeling that air is being released. Because again, I create a little bit of a pocket of air every time I grab a dumbbell and squeeze that against my body because the dumbbells are heavy. And snoring, I've been able to mitigate, even after the cheat meals. I don't notice that anymore. I think my body is already acclimatized to this increasing body weight. Again, it's been going up pretty steadily and now kind of tapers off around 100 kilos, or that's at least where I'm trying to keep it. On a Monday, that's fine, right? Usually on a Sunday, I'm about 97, 98 kilos, and then I gain a little bit of water and weight after a cheat meal and a refeed. So I'm trying to keep my body weight under 100 kilos. That's where my body feels comfortable. That's usually where I don't snore. And what I also been trying to do is not have so much food before I go to bed on the day that I refeed and have a cheat meal. Because again, when your stomach is full, it's pressing against your diaphragm from the bottom, and then you have some water retention around your neck at the end of the day, resulting in snoring. So I've been actively trying to avoid larger meals at the end of the day, so it's not pushing against my diaphragm. Most of the food has been digested, and that's been working very well for me and a lot of my clients as well that noticed they were snoring, increasingly snoring after a cheat meal or a refeed. So I told them, said, okay, have most of your food during the day, reduce the food volume at the end of the day, and voila, no more snoring. Still getting all the calories in that is required for a refeed, but most of the food has been digested by the time you go to bed. And then you don't snore, not keeping your partner awake. And the body odor has also been removed because, again, I removed some of the spices that were causing that. So now I'm back to that good old lemon, pepper, fish diet. No more ketchup, no more exotic spices. All right, let's get into the blood work, but we'll start with the urinalysis, which is not blood work. Obviously, it's the analysis of the urine, but I always analyze my urine just to make sure that I'm hydrated. Again, I always drink 1.5 liters to 2 liters of water before I go in for blood work. because the last thing I want is to have a skewed hematocrit or kidney function results, because I went in dehydrated, and the best way to determine hydration is by doing a urinalysis while you're going in for blood work. So I always drink 1.5 to 2 liters of water, do my urinalysis, and then see where my specific gravity is, which is a method to determine hydration. Specific gravity indicates how many particles are in your urine besides water. Water has a specific gravity of 1, and urine with a decent amount of particles in there that you can analyze will have a specific gravity between 1.003 to 1.03. In my case, my specific gravity was 1.008, towards the bottom end of the reference range. Sometimes I get 1.003, 1.004, 0.005 about after drinking about 1.5 to 2 liters of water. pH was 6, so a little bit on the acidic side. I could have drank a little bit more water. I'd prefer a pH of 6.5 to 7. Again, urine is going to be a little bit more acidic because you're detoxifying through urine, and some of the metabolic waste products add a little bit of acidity. So if your pH is 5.5, then that means your urine is quite acidic, and you can usually see that by the specific gravity being high. Just means that you need to drink more water. Now, color is yellow, appearance is clear, glucose is negative, protein negative, blood negative, nitrites negative, ketones negative, urobilinogen negative, bilirubin negative, and the leukocytes also negative. And all the other urinalysis results fall within normal parameters as well. Let's move over to the complete blood count and make a head-on-head comparison to the results I have from June the 4th, which was about 3 weeks before I started my cycle. I didn't retest those right before I went back on cycle because complete blood count doesn't change that much over the duration of 3 weeks, especially when you're not enhanced quite yet. And I didn't do a therapeutic phlebotomy, I didn't do a blood donation, and I did not fast during that time, which otherwise would change complete blood count markers quite rapidly. So I have the results from June the 4th, about 3 weeks before I went back on cycle. And I have the results from August 15th, last Sunday, 5 weeks into exogenous testosterone and primobolan use. In both cases, I was running the same ancillaries. So I was running 5 milligrams nebivolol, 10 milligrams ezetimibe, and 20 milligrams telmisartan. I discontinued that for 3 weeks before I started my first cycle because I wanted to see where my blood work would be at without these ancillaries in my system. If you haven't watched the video of me explaining that, you can watch it here. Because I wanted to see where my lipids would be, my blood pressure would be, and all the other markers would be that could change from these ancillaries before I went back on cycle. So I could have a little bit of a foundation regarding or understanding regarding where my cycle would lead me to when I would reintroduce these ancillaries. So I didn't recheck the complete blood count. So this is the best I can do. Complete blood count results from 2.5 months ago comparing to last weekend, running the same ancillaries in both results. On June the 4th, my white blood cell count was 5,590 cells per cubic millimeter. Hemoglobin was 14.9 grams per deciliter. Hematocrit 43% on the low end, and that's how I felt. Low hematocrit, not too much energy in the gym. Red blood cell count was 4.73 million cells per cubic millimeter, and the mean corpuscle volume 91.3. Mean corpulus hemoglobin 31.5. Mean corpulus hemoglobin concentration 34.5. And red cell distribution with 12.5%. And my complete platelet count was 235,000 cells per cubic millimeter. 5 weeks into exogenous testosterone and primobolan use, my complete blood count has changed over the duration of 2.5 months. Again, of that being 5 weeks back on cycle. Complete blood count has changed to the following. White blood cell count has reduced with about 15% to 4,740 cells per cubic millimeter. Hemoglobin has increased with about 2% to 15.2 grams per deciliter. Hematocrit has increased with almost 10%, from 43 to 47%. Red blood cell count only increased with 3% to 4.85 million cells per cubic millimeter. But you see that the mean corpulus volume has increased quite a bit, from 19 91.3 femtoliters to 96.1 femtoliters, indicating that the size of the red blood cells has increased with, 5%? Yeah, about 5% increase, which results in a higher hematocrit. So even though my white blood cell count has come down and my red blood cell count has not increased that much, the size of the red blood cells is now 5% larger, resulting in a higher hematocrit reading. And you also see that the red cell distribution width increased. So that's the difference between the size in the red blood cells. So you have the differentiation between the smaller and the larger ones is now a higher percentage. Went from 12.5% to 14.1%. So that indicates that there's a higher discrepancy in the size of the red blood cells. I'm getting a sufficient amount of iron in my diet. I'm getting a sufficient amount of vitamin B9 and B12 in my diet or through supplementation. Still, the red cell distribution width has increased. So that's something I need to pay attention to going forward. I don't think that the mean corpulus volume, the size of the red blood cells, is something I can change. Going forward, it will probably stay the same. But over time, as some of the old red blood cells are destroyed and metabolized, they will start to spill the hemoglobin content into the bloodstream. So even though my hemoglobin right now didn't increase that much, only the size of the red blood cells, once those red blood cells start to get metabolized, you'll see that the hemoglobin concentration in my bloodstream will start to increase, which will then cascade into bilirubin. So this is how everything is metabolized. Certain things will start to increase faster than other things. So even though my hemoglobin right now is not elevated and not significantly increased compared to before, at one point it will be. The longer I stay on cycle, the higher my hemoglobin will get. Now, I'm sure it will stay within the reference range. You see that my platelet count has also increased with about 10% to 254,000 cells per cubic millimeter. So now I have an increased hematocrit, increased platelets, which might increase the risk for clots. Now, I have no known issues in my family regarding clotting disorders. Dante Trudel made an informative post about genetic clotting defects or disorders, mutations that a small percentage of the population might have. He mentioned 2, but I believe there's several different genetic polymorphisms which could result in clotting disorders. So I checked all the coagulation markers that I was able to do at Bria Labs last weekend, including factor V Leiden. I didn't get those results back yet. So when I do get those results, I'll make a separate video about it. I will have to do a little bit more research because I'm not too familiar with these genetic mutations that a small percentage of the population might have. But when I have the data of my blood work and a little bit more research, I'll make a separate video about that. Again, I'm using a very steep amount of fish oil on a daily basis, and I'm using vitamin E on a daily basis to help prevent blood clots. I've been doing this for many, many years. Again, people that go on cycle, they used to use baby aspirin as a blood thinner, but I prefer to take fish oil and vitamin E, which also have a little bit of a blood thinning effect. And then on the opposite end, I take vitamin K, which helps with coagulation. So I've always been in a micronutrient sufficient state for the last 15 years. There's no clotting disorders in my family, no known instances of blood clots. I'm not worried about taking Primobolan right now or going forward in the future, staying on its dose and doing my blood work frequently. I will still get the data for you guys and make a separate video about that in hopes that it can help somebody out there. All right, let's move over to the lipid changes. I have the results from June the 27th, which I did the day before going in for the MRI. And then I still had to wait 2 weeks to get the results from the MRI before I decided, well, I have the green light on everything now regarding all my health parameters. I can go back on a little bit of exogenous testosterone plus Primobolan on top. So I have the results 2 weeks before I went back on cycle, which I can compare to the results after 5 weeks on cycle from last Sunday. On June the 27th, my total cholesterol was 167 milligrams per deciliter, triglycerides 37 milligrams per deciliter, HDL cholesterol 57 milligrams per deciliter, a little bit below the reference range, and LDL cholesterol was 106 milligrams per deciliter. Lipoprotein little a, 29 milligrams per deciliter. Again, this was 3 weeks off the ezetimibe. My lipid levels were a little bit better 3 weeks before when I was still running ezetimibe, but I wanted to see where my normal lipid levels would end up at without ancillary medications in the picture. And again, keep in mind I was still running 1,000 milligrams of citrus bergamot, fish oil with each meal, and doing my daily cardio after 5 weeks of exogenous testosterone, primobolan, and 10 milligrams ezetimibe back in the picture. Total cholesterol has come down to 135 milligrams per deciliter. Triglycerides have stayed exactly the same, from 37 to 35 milligrams per deciliter. Mine hover around 30, 35, 40 milligrams per deciliter most of the year. HDL cholesterol came down a little bit to 44 milligrams per deciliter. Yeah, that's probably the primobolan. The ezetimibe was not sufficient enough to offset that. The diet hasn't changed. The cardio hasn't changed. Nothing else has really changed beside adding in the ezetimibe, the testosterone, and the primobolan. But the LDL cholesterol came down quite a bit to 88 milligrams per deciliter. So that's good to see. But to be fair, the HDL to LDL ratio has not changed since the previous blood work. Back then, it was about 2 to 1, right? 2 times the LDL compared to the HDL. And now it's 2 to 1, 2 times the LDL compared to the HDL again. So it's come down by the introduction of ezetimibe, but the ratio has not improved. What did improve or reduced was my lipoprotein little a. It went from 29 to 14 milligrams per deciliter. So that's more evidence that testosterone and ezetimibe is able to lower a marker which is associated with cardiovascular disease, being the lipoprotein little a. So that's good news. So I'm happy to see that, even though I would like to see my HDL cholesterol a little bit higher. Again, I'm going to put some things into practice to try to improve that beyond the fish oil with each meal, beyond the cardio. And let's see if that can raise my HDL cholesterol back to favorable ranges like 50 to 60 milligrams per deciliter. Again, it's very difficult to have 50 to 60 milligrams per deciliter on your HDL when you're using exogenous testosterone, especially dihydrotestosterone derivatives, even if you keep your estradiol very, very favorable. And, well, as you see from the blood work a little bit later, estradiol is pretty comparable to where it was before. So the HDL came down due to the androgen burden, I would say. Let's move over to blood chemistry and discuss kidney functioning. Last time I did my blood work on June 27th, I did not really check too many kidney function markers. So I'll briefly run down to the results from June the 4th. Blood urea nitrogen on June the 4th was 20.3 milligrams per deciliter. Creatinine was 1.11 milligrams per deciliter. Uric acid 5.7 milligrams per deciliter. And creatine phosphokinase was 426 units per liter. A little bit elevated, but, well, my creatine phosphokinase levels are always a little bit elevated due to the cardio and the strenuous training. And yes, I did even bring or try to bring the intensity to the gym when my endogenous production was somewhere at the middle of the reference range. On the 27th of June, my creatinine increased a little bit to 1.15 milligrams per deciliter, and creatine phosphokinase reduced to 443 units per liter. 5 weeks back on cycle, my creatinine has increased to 125 milligrams per deciliter. So that's 10% increase, I would say. Again, the training intensity has increased. The skeletal muscle has increased, obviously. You can see that my creatine phosphokinase has almost quadrupled from 300 something to 1200 something units per liter. Training at a much higher training capacity than I did before. Again, I'm trying to keep a lid on it, but it's not easy to keep a lid on it when you're already at the gym and you have all these toys at your disposal. Blood urea nitrogen stayed pretty much the same to the previous results from 2.5 months ago, 18.2 milligrams per deciliter. Blood sugar is 71 milligrams per deciliter. Uric acid is 4.1 milligrams per deciliter, so that actually came down a little bit. Again, these are all moments in time. Now, I'm sure that as I'm going forward with this cycle and restore some of the muscle mass that I used to have through muscle memory and by being back on cycle and increasing my training intensity and capacity over time as I slowly get used to training insane again. Again, I'm trying to keep a lid on it, but It's still my passion. I still love to do it in my free time. And I'm sure as a result of that, getting bigger, getting stronger, increasing the intensity, my serum creatinine will increase, and so will my creatine phosphate kinase levels. So the next time I go in for blood work, I will also check my cystatin C levels again, which is the golden standard to determine kidney function, right? As your muscle mass increase and as your training capacity and intensity increases, so will serum creatinine and creatine phosphokinase. And then it becomes a worse and worse and worse metric to determine kidney function. And you should shift to cystatin C levels. So hopefully I will be able to keep my creatinine levels below 1.5 milligrams per deciliter and my creatine phosphokinase levels below 2,000 units per liter. But it wouldn't surprise me if it goes up a little bit higher than that. Again, I'm running astragalus root extract year round, doing everything I can to manipulate blood pressure, keep my kidneys as healthy as possible. And you can see that from my cystatin C levels, which have never been out of the reference range. They're always towards the bottom end of the reference range, around 0.6, 0.7, 0.8 milligrams per liter. So I'll confirm that again next time with blood work about 6-7 weeks from now to show that even though the creatinine is increasing and the creatine phosphate kinase levels are increasing, the cystatin C levels are staying exactly where they are, which is why we check cystatin C levels when we accrue more muscle tissue and the training intensity is increasing, right? That's the gold standard to determine kidney function, which I did not do at this point in time because, again, it's an outsourced test. It's a little bit more expensive and takes about a week to get back. Moving on to the liver function test, and we'll use the small results that I have from June 27th to compare the results from the last weekend to. On June 27th, my albumin was 4.3 grams per deciliter, which I probably checked to determine my bioavailable testosterone levels. AST, 32 units per liter, and ALT, 34 units per liter, both within the reference range. Again, I reintroduced training, I reintroduced some of the health supplements, which might all result in a little bit of elevated liver enzyme levels. Ferritin was somewhere in the middle of the reference range, 206 nanograms per milliliter. And as of last weekend, all my liver function tests came back within the reference range, but AST has increased to the top or over the reference range already, 45 units per liter. And ALT has increased with a little bit over 10% to 40 units per liter. So increasing the training intensity and reintroducing some of the compounds has increased my liver enzymes again. This is the highest I want them. The highest I allow my liver enzymes to get up to. If I see them over 50 units per liter, I will go in for more testing and make some adjustments to my health supplementation, my training, and everything else that could potentially raise my liver enzymes. Again, I don't want this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease to return. It was a freaking nightmare to resolve it. Not really. I mean, it was, to be honest, it was not that hard of a period. It just took a long time. It just took a very long time to resolve it. And again, that fasting mimicking diet, that was not easy. So again, this is the highest I want my liver enzymes to end up at. I will keep my close eye on it. Again, my gamma GT levels is 11 units per liter. So that's, as usual, below the reference range, which is I'm always very happy to see because that's the gold standard when it comes to true liver health. The total protein, the albumin, the albumin to globulin ratio, the total bilirubin, the direct bilirubin, the alkaline phosphatase, all of those for the majority of my life have been within the reference range. I've seen my total and direct bilirubin a little bit elevated in the past when I was running high dosages of boldenone. Again, it's a metabolic waste product of hemoglobin metabolism. So the only thing I really saw out of the reference range were my liver enzymes, which are also found in skeletal muscle. And whoop-de-doo, I'm back in the gym training hardcore. So it's to be expected that my AST is a little bit elevated. I will keep my eye on it. I've been running TUDCA and doing everything right to keep my liver as healthy as possible besides injectable glutathione, which I should be able to find perhaps pretty soon. I will inform you guys if I'm incorporating that there injectable glutathione, and then let's see if that has a positive effect on my liver enzyme concentrations or the aminotransferase concentrations in the bloodstream, which might also stem from skeletal muscle. My C-reactive protein levels on a high sensitivity test last weekend were 0.5 milligrams per liter. And 2.5 months ago, on June the 4th, my CRP levels were 0.4 milligrams per liter. So nothing much has changed there regarding this inflammatory marker. So reintroducing the testosterone and going on primobolan in castor oil has not changed my CRP levels, luckily. Again, I'm doing my absolute best to keep the inflammation as low as possible. I would still like to see it at 0.2, 0.1 milligrams per liter, but this seems to be pretty normal for me. I'll be able to reduce them further by going on a curcumin C3 complex or increasing the curcumin C3 complex. I ran out for a while because it was not available, right? Gorilla Mind was out of stock on curcumin C3 complex, so I'm reintroducing that going forward. I might be able to reduce my C-reactive protein levels to 0.2, 0.3 milligrams per liter. And I might have to change some things in my diet, which can also cause a little bit of increase in systemic inflammation. Now you see that my ferritin levels have increased by about 10%, which is another marker for inflammation besides the C-reactive protein and the homocysteine levels. Homocysteine levels I don't check so frequently. I'll check that again in 6 weeks. But every time I check my homocysteine levels, they're in range, so I don't feel so inclined to check them frequently. But I have been on top of my C-reactive protein levels ever since I figured out that synthetic carrier oils are the devil, or the cause of systemic inflammation in most bodybuilders. Check my ferritin levels. They came up with about 10%. I have been adding a little bit more beef to my diet on refeed cheat days, so once a week on Sunday. The rest of the time I still follow a pescatarian diet. Ferritin increased from 206 nanograms per milliliter to 220 nanograms per milliliter. I will keep my eye on it. Again, it's another marker for inflammation, but ferritin also stores iron. I have been increasing my iron intake, not dramatically, but again, considering that it's also a marker for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease on top of the liver enzymes and the triglycerides. So ferritin, I'm keeping my eye on you. And if you go over 300 nanograms per milliliter again, fasting mimicking diet is getting back into the picture. And I might have to go back on EDTA disodium chelate to reduce my ferritin and iron levels. Again, stay tuned for that. Right now, I don't see an immediate reason to go on a fasting mimicking diet, even though right now I'm on a fasting mimicking diet, but it's mostly just to speed up fat loss and improve the quality of my deload that I'm doing this week. And now we're finally at the hormone panel. The main reason why you clicked this video, you probably used the timestamps to skip ahead straight to the total T levels because you wanted to see where my testosterone levels ended up at after 5 weeks of going back on cycle. Let's go over the previous hormone panel first, to give a little bit of a baseline reading before I started to get back on the gain train. On June the 27th, 2021, my estradiol was 28.9 picograms per milliliter, follicle-stimulating hormone 3.22 milli-IUs per milliliter, luteinizing hormone 2.85 milli-IUs per milliliter, progesterone undetectable below 0.1 nanograms per milliliter, testosterone a whopping 589.77 nanograms per deciliter. Free testosterone was 7.03 nanograms per deciliter. Bioavailable testosterone 165 nanograms per deciliter. DHA sulfate was 254 micrograms per deciliter. And sexual binding globulin was 75.6 nanomoles per liter. Pretty much all within the normal reference ranges for a hormone panel that is representative of a man with a fully functioning hypothalamic pituitary testes and adrenal axis, albeit all of these markers are somewhere in the middle of their respective reference ranges. And I was not able to raise my FSH and LH concentrations a little bit higher, albeit I was happy with my around 600 nanograms per deciliter total testosterone readings. Now, last Sunday, my hormones looked completely different than this, besides my estradiol levels, which were very comparable to where they were previously at 30.8 picograms per milliliter. So even though I went on exogenous testosterone and a comparable amount of primobolan to match, my estradiol levels didn't really change much. So they went from 28.9 to 30.8. It's a 5-7% increase. I would say that's negligible. That's why I added in the primobolan to act as a temporary, reversely binding aromatase inhibitor by taking the place of testosterone in the aromatase enzyme and prevent testosterone from aromatizing into estradiol. Now, it doesn't block the conversion of testosterone into estradiol 100%, as you can see from this clear indication of estradiol being 30.8 picograms per milliliter, but my testosterone increased significantly. So for almost double the amount of testosterone in my bloodstream, I get the same amount of estradiol because there's primobolan in the picture, preventing additional aromatization. So it's reducing aromatization by doubling the testosterone, same estradiol. It's reducing the aromatization by about half. That's why we combine it in almost a 1-to-1 ratio. If I wanted to change my estradiol concentrations, there's a couple things I could do. Change my body fat levels, because aromatization occurs predominantly in the body fat. I'm actively trying to reduce my body fat levels. So with time, as my body fat levels come down, so will my serum estradiol concentrations. I could increase the primobolan. At this point in time, I have no interest in increasing the primobolan, considering that my hematocrit levels have already increased, and I'm already 100 kilos. So I don't feel that I need to increase my overall anabolic intake at this point in time. I can increase my injection frequency, which I'm considering to do. Well, I'm going to do it. Let's just to be clear about that. I'm going to change from bi-weekly administrations to 3 administrations per week to get my estradiol down a little bit more. Or I could add in an aromatase inhibitor or a diindole methane, which helps with estrogen balance between the estradiol, the esterol, and the estrione, which I'm not going to do as of now. I'm going to change my body fat levels and change the injection frequency, 2 variables which are going to change my level of aromatization going forward. Then 6 weeks from now, 7 weeks from now, I'll do blood work again and give you guys insight on how much my estradiol has changed without an aromatase inhibitor and without a diindole methane and without increasing the primobolan, simply by reducing my body fat levels and changing the injection frequency. So you guys can see how much of a difference that will make. Surprise, surprise, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone bottomed out. Not as bottomed out as it used to be in October 2020, or I think it was September 2020 when was the last time I checked my FSH and LH levels when I was on cycle at that time. But yeah, more proof that Kisspeptin 10 was ineffective. Now, this could mean that the Kisspeptin 10 I used was ineffective. Again, I don't have the luxury to compare another brand of Kisspeptin 10 because I only have access to one brand. So is the Kisspeptin 10 Kisspeptin 10? Is the Kisspeptin 10 accurately dosed as mentioned on the label? Is there anything besides Kisspeptin 10 in the vial, or is there nothing in the vial at all? Right? I've seen blood work on some of people that I've had consultations with that ran Kisspeptin 10, and their FSH and LH levels were in range. They were using only testosterone, not primobolan on top like I was doing. And again, my HPTA, right, the hypothalamic pituitary signaling, when I still had a functioning HPTA and HPAA, was not that stellar. I mean, judging by my previous follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone concentrations. So, as of now, I'm going to say that Kisspeptin 10, assuming that what I used was Kisspeptin 10, was ineffective. I've seen some anecdotal evidence that Kisspeptin 10 was effective. But again, that was not on my blood work. Yeah, I'm just going to say that Kisspeptin 10 is not really a suitable endeavor to approach when you're on exogenous hormones. So going forward, I will be looking at ACG instead. I would prefer to take HMG, but unfortunately, HMG at this point in time is not available. I could import it, but I don't want to take the risk. So I'm going to use Pregnyl pharmaceutical grade ACG going forward. And if I were to source HMG, I will inform you guys that I made the switch from ACG to HMG. And then, obviously my FSH and LH concentrations in the bloodstream should increase because HMG is recombinant FSH and LH. And then I will do the same experiment I did with the Kisspeptin 10, inject that 30 minutes before going in for blood work to see how high my FSH and LH concentrations will be using recombinant HMG containing LH and FSH. All right. Progesterone still the same, undetectable below 0.1 nanograms per milliliter. Total testosterone, 1066.4 nanograms per deciliter. Pretty good. Not super high. I injected 78 milligrams testosterone enanthate on Friday, about 48 hours before going in for blood work on Sunday morning. So let's say the day after the injection, it would have been a little bit higher, maybe 1200 nanograms per deciliter, something along those lines. And to be honest, I feel completely 100% comfortable with a testosterone of around 1000, 1100, 1200 nanograms per deciliter. Keep in mind that this is a chemiluminescent microparticle immunoassay, a conventional test to determine total testosterone concentrations in the bloodstream. So it's the same for estradiol. I did not do a liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometry test, which would indicate a little bit more accurately what my serum estradiol and serum testosterone levels were at the time of testing. I should be able to make a very good decision going forward on these results. But again, it might be that some of the estrogens, the esterone and estriol, is detecting as estradiol. And it might be that the primobolan is detecting as testosterone. So keep that in mind. It's not the most accurate method to test serum concentrations of your sex hormones. But judging by the fact that I look good, I feel better than I look. As of now, I'll be honest, I feel better than I look, but the looking part is slowly improving. And of course, when you look the part, you start to feel better as well. So I always make sure that when I go in for blood work, I write down how I feel regarding my libido, my mental well-being, my drive regarding business, right? All these little things. I don't want to review after seeing the results in the blood work, because every time I get blood work, it might alter the way I feel about how I've been doing over the last couple of weeks after going back on cycle. So I wrote it all down and I came to the conclusion that I felt phenomenal. To be honest, I feel really, really good. And then I saw this blood work, I saw my estrogen comparable, and I saw my testosterone almost doubled. And I decided, you know what, this is good where it is right now. I don't need to change anything. I don't need to take more tests. I don't need to take more primobolan. The only thing I'm going to do is change my injection frequency to change my estradiol concentrations. I'm going to throw the Kisspeptin 10 in the trash. And I'm starting the ACG 250 IUs Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, in between the testosterone injections, which will be on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, alongside primobolan. Now, the reason why I'm increasing my injection frequency to get lower estradiol concentrations is because, obviously, the ACG will not only produce testosterone directly in the testicles, but also estrogens, the estradiol, the estrone, the estriol, and the DHEA sulfate within the adrenal glands, which also came down from 254 micrograms per deciliter to 185 micrograms per deciliter. So that's also a steep drop in neurosteroid concentrations. Unfortunately, at Brio Labs, I can't check my pregnenolone sulfate, and DHEA levels, only DHEA sulfate. So I'm always basing my decisions off the DHEA sulfate concentrations. They went down. Kisspeptin 10 was ineffective. I'm going to switch to ACG and start producing some testosterone, estradiol, and DHEA sulfate directly in the testicles and the adrenal glands. So I'm going to increase my injection frequency to 3 times per week. In between the injections of testosterone and primo, I'm going to administer 250 IUs ACG. And then hopefully my estradiol concentrations will stay the same again. If that's not the case, I can always add in the dinyl methane, right? I'm not using an astronomical amount of ACG that's going to produce a significant amount of estradiol, but it should be sufficient to raise my DHEA to the middle top of the reference range, DHEA sulfate, and increase my testosterone levels a little bit more. Now, I also checked my sex hormone binding globulin concentrations, and that value got sliced to a third, from 75.6 nanomoles per liter to 23.7 nanomoles per liter. A significant drop, to be honest. I figured it would be around 30 nanomoles per liter. But well, it's probably the dihydrotestosterone derivative being primobolan. That always reduces my sexual binding globulin quite severely. When I was running 200 milligrams of primobolan, my sexual binding globulin was 14. Right? I did not have any libido issues. If anything, my libido was fantastic. But this is pretty much the lowest I want my sexual binding globulin to be, because I don't want to miss out on the anabolism through the sexual binding globulin receptor complex, which increases cyclic adenosine monophosphate concentrations in skeletal muscle, right? Don't want to miss out on this anabolic pathway. So I'm trying to keep my sexual binding globulin here, but going forward, I will add in the raloxifene to see if I can shrink or reduce or make my gyno disappear. I haven't done the measurements yet, so I'll do the measurements after doing this video. I shouldn't be showing this on video. I'll measure that with some calipers and then put it on the screen. That will be the starting point. Again, I have a little bit of fat on the lower chest, which will disappear, obviously, because I'm still in a cutting phase. So I'm trying to actively reduce my body fat level. So I'll account for that and measure my right nipple and my left nipple regarding the amount of gynecomastia that's present right now with some calipers, and then use that as a starting point. I will go on 60 milligrams raloxifene, spaced 30 milligrams morning, 30 milligrams evening, which might also raise my sexual binding globulin levels because raloxifene acts as an estrogen in the liver, not improving lipid levels, increasing sexual binding globulin levels. It might raise follicle-stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone levels a little bit. It's not as potent as clomiphene or enclomiphene in that sense, where it can block the estrogen receptors in the hypothalamus and the pituitary, allowing for a little bit of a luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone secretion, on exogenous testosterone and perhaps primobolan. So that's why I did all of this blood work to see what is going to change 6-7 weeks from now when I introduce the raloxifene to see if it can shrink my gyno. And I will run the raloxifene for about 6-7 weeks at 60 milligrams to see how effective that is. And then before considering bumping up the dose, again, I will go in for blood work, see where my HDL ended up at, where my sexual binding globulin levels ended up at, and see if raloxifene had a severe negative effect on my IGF-1 concentrations, which the last time I checked was on June the 4th. That's 2.5 months ago. And then my IGF-1 levels were 225 nanograms per milliliter. And I also checked my thyroid hormone levels in anticipation of switching from kisspeptin 10 to ACG, because we know that ACG also acts on the thyroid gland that is a similar peptide chain as a thyroid-stimulating hormone. So I want to get a baseline reading of my thyroid function as of now without exogenous T4. I'm not using any T4 because I'm not using growth hormone. I'm using HGH frag, which, as far as I was able to piece together, does not have an effect, a positive or negative effect on thyroid conversion from T4 into T3, which growth hormone does. So I wanted to get a baseline reading of my free T3, free T4, thyroid stimulating hormone before introducing the ACG and see how much of a change that would have, to see if my THAs would come down, if my T4 would come up, and how it would affect my T3 concentrations. Again, without the inclusion of an exogenous T4, which I would normally supplement with exogenous growth hormone. So I'll run that experiment, see how much of a change the ACG will have on my thyroid levels. And as of last weekend, my free T3 was 2.53 picograms per milliliter. Free T4 was 0.98 nanograms per deciliter, which on this reference range here in Thailand is normal. But if you look at the Western reference range, they start from 0.9, usually end up at 1.4 to 1.7 nanograms per deciliter. So I would say this is a little bit on the low side. And again, I may have a little bit larger body than the rest of the Asians here. So I would say that's a low number, albeit still within the reference range. You see that my thyroid stimulating hormone is 1.92 micro-IUs per milliliter. So all within the reference range. Let's see how that's going to change over the next 6 to 7 weeks after introducing the ACG. which might alter thyroid function and speed up metabolism. So I'm expecting a lower thyroid-stimulating hormone level, higher free T4, and a higher free T3 level, at least a higher free T4. Again, the thyroid produces T4, which then has to be converted into T3 with the deiodinase enzymes, right, at an appropriate rate, depending on caloric intake, energy expenditure, cardio activity, and all the many different factors that determine how much of the T4 is going to convert into T3. So we'll have to wait and see how much of a change the ACG will have on my thyroid marker. All right, so let's summarize everything that I've discussed in this video and the modifications that I'm going to make regarding my performance-enhancing drug protocol going forwards. I will continue with the same testosterone and primobolan protocol, being 156 milligrams test enanthate per week plus 125 milligrams primobolan per week, but I will change the injection frequency from Monday and Friday to Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So I'll administer 52 milligrams testosterone enanthate Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and 41.7 milligrams primobolan Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Combined in the same syringe because it's the same carrier oil, castor oil. I'll just do one injection of my test and primo together, alternating butt cheeks, right? That's my favorite injection site, the last injection site where it's apparent that I had an administration. And my wife is not going to care about a little bump and lump on my glutes, which I don't really have. Those injections are smooth as silk, smooth as butter, castor oil, the best carrier oil. I'm thinking about adding in 5 milligrams oxandrolone, but I'm going to hold out. I'm going to wait for the blood work on raloxifene and see how much of a change that has on my sexual hormone globulin and HDL concentrations and IGF-1 levels. So I'm going to hold out. I would like to add it in, but again, I'm going to hold out for the blood work 6 weeks from now. 60 milligrams raloxifene daily, split 30 milligrams morning and evening. After I've got my blood work, I might consider increasing to 120 milligrams raloxifene daily, 60 milligrams morning, 60 milligrams evening. And then depending on my liver enzymes and all the other markers that I'm going to check 6 weeks from now, I might think about adding 5 milligrams oxandrolone sublingually pre-workout 5 times per week. So the overall anabolic androgenic steroid intake is going to remain the same, but testosterone concentrations will increase because I will also add in 250 IUs ACG Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, right? It's going to produce some testosterone and estradiol in the bloodstream, which is going to increase overall anabolism, and then hopefully the increased injection frequency and increased intake of primobolan, even though it's not a higher intake, it's a more frequent intake, should keep my estradiol somewhat favorable. And again, if I notice high estradiol levels, going in for blood work earlier than the 6 or 7 week mark from now, and then determine if I need diindolylmethane or go into a daily administration frequency, which I would lean towards diindolylmethane because it's easier, less scar tissue buildup that way. I will keep the same. The GHK copper, 5 to 10 milligrams injected bilaterally post-workout intramuscularly, so that's 5 times per week. HGH frag will stay the same, 250 micrograms pre-cardio and pre-workout. 5 milligrams nebivolol, 10 milligrams ezetimibe, 20 milligrams telmisartan as my ancillaries. But I will fast for 1 week, which I already started this week, as I alluded to a little bit earlier in this video. I will fast this week. Do a deload this week, but I'll make separate videos about the fasting protocol and the deload protocol that I'll be doing this week to initiate a little bit of fat loss, recover from the ever-increasing workout capacity that I've been subjecting myself to over the last couple of weeks, and do a before and after with the blood work I just showed you. That will be the before moment, and the after will be the blood work I will do next Saturday, after a fasting mimicking diet for 5.5 days. Again, I'll make a separate video about that, what I'll be eating, right? I'll still do fasting mimicking with some vegetables. I'll be increasing my performance-enhancing drugs a little bit for the next couple of days to stimulate fat loss. Make a separate video for that as well. So that's 3 videos that are coming from yours truly. Releasing those over the next couple of days. Stay tuned for those videos, guys. Subscribe if you haven't already to get those videos. Make sure you hit the notification bell button so you get notified when those videos drop. For now, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're looking for the most comprehensive guides to bodybuilding pharmacology, you can find the ebooks on my website, vigoroussteve.com/shop. Personalized advice always available through consultations. You can contact me directly if you're interested. Follow me on Instagram if you haven't followed me there yet already, @VigorousSteve. And a front double bicep for the Vigorous crew. You guys know what to do. Thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end. I know you guys are still with me. You guys are loyal AF. Thank you guys so much for watching and see you in the next video.